Okay, so before we even get into numbers, ray tracing, frame rate, all that stuff, there's something about this situation that people are kind of underestimating. Digital Foundry got early access to Crimson Desert again. Not a review code, not a final build under embargo, it's early technical access. They had the ability to analyze it carefully instead of just rushing impressions out the door. And that doesn't just randomly happen. Studios are usually extremely careful with who they give early builds to, especially when it comes to performance. Because once Digital Foundry has it, you can't hide anything. They're going to zoom in on every crack and crevice and check every shadow. They're going to notice if lighting is off in any part of the game. They're not a hype channel, so when Pearl Abyss gives them that level of access, that tells me they're not afraid of what's under the hood. And I think that matters a lot right now, because the last few years of big open world releases have trained people to be cautious. We've seen a lot of amazing trailers before. We've seen vertical slices that look absolutely insane, and then when the real performance comes out, it doesn't quite match up. So when Crimson Desert started showing dense cities, heavy physics, huge draw distances, dynamic weather, big combat systems, the first reaction from a lot of people wasn't exactly excitement. It was more along the lines of hesitation. Okay, but how does this actually run? And that's not negativity, that's just experience talking. What's interesting is that instead of ignoring the question, Pearl Abyss leaned into it. They didn't just show more cinematic gameplay, they showed specs. They let Digital Foundry capture raw footage, and even analyze ray tracing. They let them stress the game. That changes the tone of the conversation immediately because now we're not guessing anymore. Now we're actually looking at real technical behavior. And that's a much stronger position to be in this close to launch. Now, let's talk about what actually surprised me. This build was running natively at 4K. And I know some people will hear that and say, well, yeah, high-end PC, but slow down for a second. Native 4K, ray tracing enabled, ultra settings in a dense open world, hovering around 60 frames per second, that's not something that's easy to hit. A lot of modern PC games, even good ones, are optimized around the assumption that you'll be using DLSS or FSR, which is fine. I mean, upscaling tech is genuinely impressive nowadays. But it changes the foundation of how performance targets are approached. There's a big difference between designing your game to run solidly at native resolution and then offering upscaling as headroom versus designing your performance target around reconstruction from the start. From what they showed, Crimson Desert seems closer to the first approach. FSR was active, but mostly for anti-aliasing purposes, so that means it wasn't carrying the entire image. And that's important because it means the base image is strong on its own. You're not relying on reconstruction to clean up any instability or hide heavy compromises. The hardware they used was a Ryzen 9 7900X3D and a 7900 XTX. That's powerful, yes, but it's real hardware that people actually own right now. It's not some unreleased monster GPU. And the fact that the game can sit around that 60 FPS mark under those conditions suggests the engine is scaling properly. It also doesn't look like it's barely scraping by. Frame pacing looks stable, lighting held up, no obvious problems during heavy scenes. I think we've gotten used to picking between different modes. We've gotten used to dialing things back. So seeing something push native like this feels different. It feels deliberate, and that's what really stood out for me. Not the numbers themselves, but how composed it looked while doing it. Now, if you're trying to figure out why the footage feels heavier, in a good way, it's mostly lighting. Yes, the textures are more detailed, yes, character models are sharp, but lighting is what sells the space. They're using full ray trace global illumination, proper reflections, dynamic time of day changes that aren't just cosmetic shifts in color grading. When the sun moves, the world responds. Mountains cast long shadows that actually affect the environment. Interiors don't feel disconnected from exteriors. If you're inside a building and the sun shifts, the light entering through the windows shifts with it. All these small details really lend to the immersion. And nighttime is handled properly. It actually gets dark. You can feel the loss of sunlight instead of just seeing a blue tint applied to the scene. Artificial light sources feel meaningful. A lot of games keep nighttime artificially readable at all times. Everything stays slightly lifted so you never lose clarity. That makes gameplay easier, but it also flattens the atmosphere. Here, darkness has weight, and in motion, the lighting doesn't break apart. That's the key thing they pointed out. You can always freeze frame something and find small artifacts. Every modern engine has them, but when the camera moves, the image stays stable. No obvious flickering shadows, no aggressive lighting pop-in, no sudden shifts in global illumination. It feels real, it feels cohesive. And when it feels like that, your brain just stops questioning the world. It kind of accepts it. That's why the footage doesn't look like a tech demo, it looks like a world functioning under consistent rules. Now just look at that water, because at first glance it looks impressive, but if you actually watch how it behaves, it's doing more than just looping animations. When waves hit rocks, they wrap around geometry instead of clipping awkwardly. When they pull back, there's variation. Shorelines don't feel static. Rivers don't look like flat surfaces sliding forward, they move with subtle variation in weight. Now, is it perfect? No. That's not realistic for a game of this scale, but it's convincing enough that your brain registers it as physical instead of decorative. And once you notice that, you start noticing other things. Little bits of vegetation reacting, objects responding to impact, environmental pieces that aren't just glued in place. The world feels interactive. That's something we don't see pushed this hard very often anymore. A lot of big budget open worlds focus on cinematic presentation first. This feels like it's trying to keep the presentation high while also building systematic layers underneath. And all that is pretty expensive. It's much easier to fake interaction than to simulate it properly. So when you combine heavy lighting, dense environments, dynamic weather, and reactive physics, and the performance still holds steady on that hardware, it means that the engine is doing some serious work. And that's what gives me confidence in the long term. The more I watch the footage, the more I realize I wasn't hunting for problems anymore. Usually with big games like this, especially open worlds that push heavy visuals, I'm waiting for the moment where it kind of falls apart. A camera pan that stutters, a lighting shift that looks off, something that reminds you it's still barely holding together. Here I just wasn't really doing that. I was watching the actual world instead of scanning the edges of the frame. It's a whole different experience. There's a lot going on at once in these scenes. Combat effects, wind moving through trees, clouds shifting across terrain, water moving with weight. It's busy, but it doesn't feel messy. And that's probably the biggest compliment I can give it right now. Nothing about the demo felt like it was being carefully avoided. They weren't steering the camera away from certain areas, they weren't hiding the world behind tight shots, it felt open and confident. Now, we still haven't seen console footage in detail, and that's obviously going to matter. That kind of hardware changes the whole equation. You don't get the safety net of someone's high-end PC build. So yeah, that's still in the back of my mind, but watching this preview didn't give me that uneasy feeling that sometimes shows up before launch. You know, that feeling where you can tell a game is being managed very carefully with marketing. This didn't feel fragile, it felt finished enough to show without excuses attached to it. And that's kinda rare lately. At this point, I'm mostly just curious to see how consistent it stays. Because if what we're seeing here is representative of the final direction, then the conversation around this game is going to shift naturally once people get their hands on it. No dramatic turnarounds, no redemption arc, just a smooth launch where the technical side holds up. That's honestly all most people really want. I'm not entirely ready to fully commit to anything yet. We still need real world testing, we still need to see how it behaves outside of these controlled previews. But I feel better about it than I did before this breakdown. That's probably the simplest way to put it. If you've been worried specifically about performance, this should at least lower the temperature a bit. We'll see what happens when it's actually out in the wild. So if you're following the game, stick around. I'll try to cover performance the second we get some proper information. And if something looks off, we'll talk about that too. Well, that's all from me for now. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And as always, have a great one.